Hello, I want to make sure I got that set there. Okay, hello everyone. I'm getting started a little early as I start to get some announcements going and whatnot for overall content and stuff, because obviously it's been slower. The good news is that's because I'm going to be a published researcher soon. We had a paper get accepted, so that is going to be, the main reason that I was slow on a lot of the production. So yeah, that'll be a video hopefully soon. Depends on when the official publication date of the paper is, obviously. Don't want to, get all the information out there before it's officially published, peer reviewed, and all that process is done. But it is very exciting that we are getting that going. Additionally, this is the November one because I have it written. The next month in review is probably going to be a little bit more selective, and I am going to be trying to focus more so on just getting caught up with where we are now. With that said, hopefully people can hear me in the chat and whatnot. Hopefully. Looking for chats. There we go. Duonicus. Yeah, Duonicus will be an interesting one to cover because the therizinosaurs are interesting. Having 2 fingers is interesting and also shows up in other groups. So it seems like it's something that a lot of these dinosaurs were doing. So yeah, again, just content slow because doing actual research as opposed to just doing raptor chatter. So trying to split myself between multiple things. And now I'm getting a little more streamlined at that, I hope. With that said, we are going to get started with this one. So this is the oldest fossil record in the Iberian Peninsula. So that's going to be Spain, Portugal, and Andorra. I would consider them more in the mountains than specifically Iberian, but I don't know. People from Andorra can tell me more about their perspectives on it, I suppose. So yeah, this is the Acrotarchs, which is this like kind of single cell, almost embryonic style fossil that you get sometimes. They're not exactly the prettiest things in the world. It's like, look, that's potentially a fossil. It's obviously not very high quality. Here's some 3-dimensional ones. The important thing is they are very clearly organic, right? That's not a mineral that's growing that way. It's very clearly something that was biotic in origin. And so these ones, I think the important part that I put in here is figure, again, they're not the prettiest fossils. But what we can do is jump to here. There we go. And hopefully my internet does not keep crashing on me. And so what you're getting here is just the geological setting, right? So you have this big magmatic arc, which means, there's volcanoes and such as you're getting this subduction. And then as you're getting out here, you're getting into the slope of the offshore environment. Essentially, as this builds up, the rest of the crust flexes some, and this all rolls into here. And eventually gets more deformed as geology continues to have things run into one another. So that's kind of the conditions that these were preserved in. Again, you're getting them just off the slope here. So it's just, hey, yeah, it's near shore, but not on the shore. Interesting to see as we're starting to get closer and closer to the Cambrian explosion, kind of how we're starting to see a lot of these. So that's that one. And now jumping to the Yixian Formation in China. Unfortunately, this one is not open access. However, it's not that big of a deal because if I just do the Yixian Formation, we should be able to get to fossils. And you can see this is where you're getting a lot of these really nicely preserved fossils. And so, I'm kind of in the way there. But regardless, what you're seeing is, like, again, really good preservation. You're getting these really nice fossils preserved with the feathers and whatnot. But they did a lot of high fidelity resolution, like dating of the different sediments, because there's a lot of ash beds in here. So you can do your radiometric dating by shooting lasers at the rock and seeing what isotopes are there. And so the whole thing was less than 100,000 years in time. So it's this really tightly confined snapshot into what was happening in the in this mountain basin, right? Because you got to think this is a high elevation basin with volcanoes around it, and so we're getting a really, really highly precise time period of that. This is where you have things like Ute as well. So that's really cool to have that it's 3D and Ute is really big and all this stuff. The interesting thing is they also suggest a lot of the fossils come from burrow collapses, like potentially some of the 3D Psittacosaurus and such. Even the one where there's the Repenomamus, which is a mammal that was hunting a Psittacosaurus, that potentially could have also been a burrow collapse, as opposed to what the authors first suggested when they found that fossil, that, oh yeah, the volcano erupted and all of the ash and stuff covered it really quickly. And it's like, That seems a little less likely. That the idea that it was a burrow collapse seems much more reasonable. So I do like that idea. Ute probably wasn't fitting in burrows though, so I hope people do some more taphonomy on those, because yeah, it's not going to fit in a burrow if it's a 30-foot long, 13-foot tallish. So what is that? That's 10 meters long and 4 meters tall animal. It's not going to just slide into a burrow just fine. So yeah, but really nice to see that we're getting a little bit better understanding of what was happening in the Yixian biota, because so much of the work has just been, hey, look, there's fossils with feathers. Now we're actually starting to understand the ecosystem as a whole a lot better. Come on. There we go. Next one is loading. Okay, maybe it's loading. If my internet... No, it says I'm... Okay, nope, it dropped again. Okay, my internet's coming in and out, so we'll see how I get this to work. This one is largely just methods, though. So it's just the framework. It's how to get a lot of the microscopic data that you can find in fossils and from microfossils, and start putting it all together and integrating all of it. Because, there's people who are looking at just the conodonts, for example, or just the forams, and it's starting to just kind of merge a lot of that together, including with stuff like some of these chemicals as well. So you have your oxygen correlates, your CO2 correlates. So basically just a methods paper. It's going to be really exciting to see where this can go for understanding different environments. And comment in the chat is, Psittacosaurus went into the mammal's burrow and the mammal was defending itself, or the mammal went into the Psittacosaurus' burrow? From what I know of the Yixian biota, there are some things like some oreodromines, which are an ornithopod dinosaur, which that group seemingly was burrowing quite a bit. And I believe some of them have been found from there. So likely, if I had to take a guess, the Psittacosaurus was using one of those burrows and the Raphenomammus tracked it into there. That's really hard to know for sure because, it's just the bones, because everything, they've been dead for millions of years. But that would be my guess. Because especially in a confined position like that, the mammal might feel a little more confident as well. So that could very well be what happened. But again, hard to know for sure. And again, just on this paper, with Woodhouse et al., it's laying out a groundwork for trying to just synthesize and integrate a lot of data. Okay, this one's just from GSA Today, so Geological Society of America Today. What's important about this is it's looking at the Bright Angel Shale, Tapete Sandstone, and Moab Limestone, which are really important formations for understanding how the Earth works as far as different sea levels. So Tapete Sandstone is like a near-shore environment, like you are at the beach. Bright Angel Shale, you're starting to get a little bit offshore. You're starting to get some more muds that are getting, carried out by the streams, and you're not at the beach anymore. You're a little bit further. And then the limestone, again, you're a little bit further additionally beyond that. So what that means is if you were in this spot over the course of, 10 to 15 million years, you're going to go from being in the beach to being slightly offshore to being all the way offshore in a reef system. So this is really important for our understanding of, sequence stratigraphy, which is, just how oceans can shift what levels they're at and what kind of rocks they lay down. However, this one was basically looking and going, yeah, this is actually a lot more complex than what McKee first said. And he's kind of the guy who came up with a lot of this stuff by the Grand Canyon, just because the rock record is so continuous through the Grand Canyon, it's easy to see. But once you start getting, your nose to the limestone, you can really see that there's a lot of differences. There's places where it's not just a simple, oh yeah, the ocean was here, and then it just continuous trajectory to covering the area. There were give and takes throughout that entire process. So there's that. Oh, and then also you can go down more. Yeah. Sorry, my hand is injured, so I'm not the best at scrolling down right now. 'Cause whole wrist brace and stuff. You do have different trilobites throughout here too, so you can kind of see what different environments different trilobites are living in based on that stratigraphy as well. So yeah, neat stuff. Again, like really important stuff for just how we practice geology. So this one was looking at the osteoderms and dermal ossicles of Antarctopelta, which is an Ankylosaur from, believe it or not, Antarctica. And so we're starting to look at some of these. What they found is they did, where is it? Figure 9. Figure 9, somewhere, there we go. Put in figure viewer, come on. So what they were able to do is, by looking at the different structures on these, they were able to see how they would sit in the skin. Where, you know, early on, when it's young, it's just going to kind of barely exist there, barely be attached. But as the animal starts to get larger, you're getting this larger growth deeper into the skin to help anchor it in. And so that's really cool to see that we are actually figuring out how osteoderms worked, not just like, oh yeah, they were in the skin and helped protect it, how they were in the skin so that we can understand how they grew. So yeah, and like I said, they were doing some thin sectioning and whatnot with these to really understand where the different structures that would help anchor it would have been. So there's that. A whole bunch of, just basically an entire summary of this fossil clam shrimp genus. They're kind of like ostracods. Let me actually just pop one up for you guys. There you go. It's a shrimp that's kind of like a clam. Are we not getting internet? Gosh, my internet's all over the place. It's a shrimp. It's kind of like a clam. Does the name. Clam shrimp. So, yep, that's what we're looking at here. So yeah, they looked at 249 species within this genus and the locations they were found. And what this means is now, if you're looking at a new rock section and you find some, hopefully you can figure out what species it is and start to use it to understand like what age your rock is based on what species it is. And you can see here's the list of where all of these are from. So this is what they were doing, is essentially setting up a framework using clam shrimp for having a global database of clam shrimp in order to do better biostratigraphy work. Again, not like big fancy dinosaurs, but very important to how we do paleontology. Full size? Full size. Dang. I always do that. I always click the wrong one. This one, I mean, I'm just using this because it's easy and convenient to have a visual, a graphical abstract. But basically, they looked at the insects to see what was happening here in the Yanliao biota. So I talked about the Yixian just a little bit ago. This would have been slightly older. They still found a decent amount of elevation here, about 500 meters, so 1,640 feet, to about 800 meters, so 2,625 feet. Annual temperature would have been about 15 to 20 Celsius, which is slightly cooler than room temperature, so it's a pretty temperate world. It's not like, you know, ice cold, but it's moderate. And then about 59 to 79 inches of rain, so 1,500 millimeters to 2,000 millimeters. So you can kind of get a sense that it would have been reasonably wet, moderately high altitude, and then again, those mountains would continue to build into the Yixian biota, but that's kind of the environment that we're getting here. So, yeah, I mean, that's that one. Moving on to the next, make sure I'm clicking the right one. And this one's about proboscideans, so elephants and their relatives from Tejas, Texas. This includes things like Homotherium, which is not the same as, it would have just had a different structure to the skull, you know, the little forward projections and such. A lot of this is just based on tooth records, though, which mammal teeth are really good at being preserved. There are obviously some other bits as well. And based on the fossils here, these are all from the Fleming group. And so you're able to kind of narrow the age of that based on which fossils are here. I thought there was a figure for it. Did I go past it already? I think I might have gone past it already. That must have been that top one. Oh yeah, so here you go. This is the Fleming group. Starting to narrow down this part so we can understand where these ones fit in as well. And again, Miocene about 15 million years ago, either side of that. So, good to see. Gump is supreme. Someone likes Gomphotherium. Gomphotherium, it's a good one. I do like it. It's a really interesting Proboscidean, really interesting elephant. Loosely elephant. Because I'm not an elephant taxonomist. I am not sure exactly where elephants start and stop, or if it's just proto-elephant. So this one's actually really interesting as well. So this is with Tanystropheus, which really long neck. And I actually really like this because they show that there's this giant internal cavity, IC, internal cavity, right? That helps to lighten the entire neck, but also keeps the bone strong so that they could still have these very long necks for when they're feeding in the water, right? You got to think the Tanystrophiids, so animals like this, would not have paddles for be able to swim as actively as like a plesiosaur, which would also have a long neck. These instead probably punted along the bottom like a hippo, where they'd kind of be jogging through the water, and then their long necks would be able to get into schools of fish or squid, depending on the taxa, because there's 2 species of Tanystropheus, and they seem to have had slightly different diets. Also say in this one, figure 11, and I cannot scroll well because my wrist is hurt. Again, I apologize. Sorry, I see some new people came in, so I am just letting people know that I am injured. Where is it? There you go. This one. This is a beautiful figure. Like, look at that. Here's your vertebra of a Tanystropheid, where you have bone marrow, a large bone marrow cavity. Your processes on the back. Your spinal cord running through, but you can see just how empty it is, which is really, really unique. Tanystropheus is... I love my weird Triassic things. They're fantastic. Also, yeah, wrist injuries. So yeah, I just... This is so cool to actually like look inside of it and be able to see what was going on. Oh, is this one a download? No, it's not a download. Cool. This one is not necessarily paleo, but adjacent because it's talking about extinction, but in the modern day. It's interesting because they basically go, yeah, we don't know if there's actually a 6th extinction going on, but there is unprecedented species lost, which, I don't know, kind of seems self-explanatory that it is also just another mass extinction potentially. And they're largely just worrying about the terminology that is used to describe this, because the public interacts with a lot of that terminology differently than the scientific community does. So yeah, sure, like, okay, we're doing vaguely what is a mass extinction, right? Like, that's the kind of thing that they're talking about. How do you communicate that idea to the public? I think we can just keep going with what we've been doing, because I think it's starting to get to the point where people are realizing what's been happening. I'm sure there are some ways that you can try and start being more specific with your wording, but from what I read, they just kind of go, here's what these people have said, and we need to try and find a better way to do this, as opposed to having direct language that they want people to use in order to communicate this idea to the public. So it's interesting. It's just, I think it could be, I think the conclusions could be a little bit more definitive. The next one I got to download, so I'm going to do that. Download, where'd you download at? And I know for at least one person who is in the chat they'll appreciate a paper coming from Alaska, because I know they're in Alaska. So, if you know who you are, you know who you are. No, they don't. For Tyrannosaurus Rex in the chat, they didn't really do any FEA on the neck stuff. I imagine that would be something down the line that they're going to do. Because this is largely just discussing the morphology and how it would have been able to help the neck function without doing any specific measurements on it. Just a, hey, we have this, massive amount of lightening in the neck, as opposed to having a really heavy neck. So, yeah, I imagine they do. I didn't see anything that looked like FEA when I read through the paper. Anyway, Alaska. This is just stratigraphy of plant and arthropod fossils from the Arctic slope, like north Alaska. And so they're looking at this. There's ice wedges, which are problems because essentially you get little pockets of water that then freeze and expand, and they start to almost look like fossils sometimes. That's what the term pseudomorph here means. And then, like I said, they're basically just using this. And here you can actually see the pseudomorph, where it almost looks like a fossil because it's just, wow, what's this weird shape here? It's ice, which is not nearly as useful as having an actual fossil. Overall, they're mostly just looking at the age of this. You're getting some little bits of arthropods here and there. So, some beetle elytra, which are like the all insects started with 4 wings, or at least all flying insects started with 4 wings. Beetles turned 2 of those into like the kind of hard shell on the back. Those are called elytra. And so that's what you got here is some of these elytra. Based on the age, on what's here, this is just after the mid Paleocensian warming period, which is about 3.2 million years ago. So moderately recent. And again, like they're way north. If I can, did I scroll past the map already? I may have scrolled past the map, or is there a map? I don't recall. Yeah, here you go. Study area. So they're way up north, right? So ways out there. But again, like you're showing plant and bug communities that would have been there 3 million years ago, kind of during the start of the cooling of the ice ages, right? Is my timing right? My timing might be off. That might be in the middle of the ice ages, actually. I think that's in the middle of them. Regardless, cool to see. We're getting these really good looks at some underappreciated communities which would have existed during the ice ages. Primates, fun fact, evolved in North America, at least the very first ones. And these would have been very, like, tarsier-like. So for tarsiers, just going through my notes just to make sure everyone is aware of what a tarsier is. They're very early branching primates, monkeys, loosely. There you go. Here's one. Thanks, Wikipedia. They hang onto trees and jump around and eat insects. And that's probably what these early ones were doing, even in places like Colorado during the Eocene. And there's a few different ones of them. Some of them also might have been a little more lemur-like than just tarsier-like. There's no new species, but as we get to systematic paleontology, we can see there's a lot of species that are already named. This one's named by Marsh, like of the Bone Wars in 1872. So a lot of these fossils have been known about for a long time. It's just, hey, we have a new site with a whole bunch of them. This is going to be one of the more lemur-like ones, and the other being the more tarsier-like one. So Tarsiformes, there you go. So we got that going. Why do I have a message? I am. Do I have the right thing? Hang on. My wife is wanting me to gonna share a link, post it on other social media. So I'm just going to very quickly post this online. Elsewhere, and then I will be right back for everyone. So I apologize. Okay, there we go. Cool, that's done. Anyway, yeah, so interesting monkeys. Like, I just think it's so interesting that primates evolved in North America, and then as grasslands expanded, they died out in North America but succeeded elsewhere. So interesting history here. Going back into the Ediacaran, this is about Arimacia germsi, which is a new sponge species, and importantly, this might be one of the first archaeocyanths, which is this weird group of sponges that don't have any living relatives, but were really common in the Cambrian. Again, this is Ediacaran, so this is before the Cambrian, so we're kind of getting close to that origination point for this group. Unfortunately, these fossils are largely just sandstone impressions, and that's what we find throughout the Ediacaran, not just in the Ediacaran of Namibia, where these ones are from. If I can get to... And a lot of this is stratigraphy, telling us how old it is. There we go, there's the name for it. And here's the fossil once it pops open. Unfortunately, my internet is running just a little bit slowly, so hopefully this will load in at some point. Come on. Regardless, like I said, a lot of these are sandstone impressions. So what that means is the organism would have been living along the seafloor, and every now and then you'd have these underwater sand dunes that would just collapse and bury them. And that's kind of how we're able to know how these fossils even existed, because they didn't really have hard. Instead, just the sand covered them, took the shape of them, and because there were limited biotic communities at the time, seemingly, the decay happened slow enough that the sand that had covered them could harden into kind of the shape of what it would have been like. And again, it might have been a little flatter in the fossil because, again, there's a sand dune on top of it, but than it would have been in life. But still a good understanding of what it would have looked like. Okay, are you getting there? Okay, this is popping up. Nope. Okay. Regardless, yeah, just these kind of trumpet-like tops of sponges is what this is, right? There's a few of them, so it seems like they're pretty well spread. So yeah, I mean, it's very cool to find more. We're finding more and more fossils from the Ediacaran that we can start pointing at modern groups and going, oh yeah, that's really similar. And then one of the most famous discoveries of the entire year is the Homotherium mummy. I mean, there's not much else to say other than, yeah, it's a Homotherium mummy. Most of you guys have probably seen this. If you haven't, Homotherium was a saber-toothed cat. And it had a really wide distribution into North America, Eurasia, and all the way into Africa. So, like, it was everywhere almost. And this one was in the Siberian tundra, and a den collapsed on it, and here it is, mummified, frozen in the permafrost for centuries, thousands of years. So yeah, I mean, it's what it is. It does have longer lips than modern cats because they compared it to a modern day lion cub, and that suggests that, yeah, as adults they probably had longer lips to cover the saber teeth, so it wouldn't be like in some of the paleo art you might have seen where the teeth are very obvious and showing. They were probably covered for the most part. Additionally, it had like a little goatee, which we don't see in modern lion cubs, so that's just a fun little thing to see on it. And also, because I know people are going to comment on it about, could we clone this Homotherium? No, and I'm really sorry to say that, but you have to think of it from a modern day, using modern day cats as an example, right? We already have issues if we were like doing a hybrid between lions and tigers, and those are separated by maybe 2 million years of evolution, whereas this is separated from modern day cats by orders of magnitude more time, because essentially you have the origination of cats, you have the saber-toothed cats, and you have all modern cats on the other branch. So it is one of the oldest separations in modern mammal faunas, which means no, you're really not going to be able to get a good viable clone of this animal using a modern cat, just because the evolutionary groups are just too disparate. They are too far apart to really be likely to succeed, which is unfortunate. It'd be neat to have, but it'd be really, it would be a challenge. All right, so this is essentially a look at how do teachers get students to care about evolution, what evidence works and such. I like the figures here because you can go and see, wow, what really worked before and after COVID. Demonstrations of natural selection increased on some of these, and it's hit or miss depending on what statistical methods were used. But you really need to be able to present evidence. And I think the other thing that's really important is look at the yellows. That's molecular biology with DNA. We're able to go look at the DNA of these organisms, and these changes here, here, and here are what make these two different organisms. And it's only those changes that could happen randomly at any time, and it makes a lot of sense. There's certain kinds of monkey flowers, I think it is, where it's like, yeah, this one gene changes the entire shape of the flower and the color of the flower. And so there's two populations that live alongside each other, and just at some point, one of them was the parent population, had this change in a small part of it, and now an entirely new species popped up. And so being able to look at the DNA and say that is really, really useful. And yeah, they discuss a lot about this, to be fair. There's a lot of figures. They do a lot of graphs that are explaining a lot of different parts of it, how people and how people respond to the different evidence as they're going through this. So the pedagogy of evolution, as it were. How do we teach evolution? And this paper has some good, solid ideas for it. And now we are heading to Milwaukee-ish. This is the Waukesha biota in Wisconsin, and it is very near Milwaukee, actually. But it's there's the site. They give you exactly where it is. It's a new trilobite. That should be loading in here in a moment. And it doesn't have a caudal spine. So caudal spine is, some trilobites have this really long kind of tail spike at the very end of their body. Instead, this one is embayed with genal spines that are on the sides of the tail instead of just one in the middle. That means it might have been able to roll up easier and defend itself using those spikes. It's definitely a concept. Hopefully these photos load in so that I can show you better. Oh, here we go. Here's figure 4. So this is what we're talking about, right? Where you have this kind of more embayed bit. And then actually, Waukesha is this one. So yeah, this is the embayed bit that we have on this one. I don't recall if there were... No, the genal spines are the cheek spines then. Yeah, I'm getting that backwards. So the cheek spines actually, and those still could have helped defend it. There we go. There's the genal spines. If you're gonna load, please load. 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, you're taking too long. So yeah, these cheek spines rather are the genal spines, and there's a bunch of these, right? Like you're getting a lot of them. So it's neat to see that it's similar to what we see in other trilobites, that it has some of its own stuff. I'm surprised comparative anatomy got so little response. Yeah, Altosaur, when we're done, I'm going to take a little break, and then I'm going to go back through and add the DOIs in the description, just upload this as a video on the channel. So yeah, the descriptions or all the papers will be there. So don't worry about that, Ale. So that's Wacutia-ensis? No, Wacutia aspis, which is, aspis is a pretty common part of a name for trilobites, for various trilobites. Proceedings of the Royal Society, open access. Crazy. Sorry, just the journal. I love open access journals. So this one's looking at fossil squirrels, specifically in Paleosaurus, which is just basically the name translates to fossil squirrel, old squirrel. Very exciting stuff. But they were looking at two different species and the way that their limbs are built. And so Paleosaurus goti would have been more in the trees, and Paleosaurus Gyneuxi would have been more on the ground. So this is like really close to the origin point of squirrels, meaning that they diversified into a lot of niches very quickly. There's already some that are very more specific, or there were already some that were more specifically living on the ground, and some that were already living in the trees. So they just kind of, hey, look, we can do all kinds of things now. And even today, it's easy to forget that there's a ton of ground squirrels around, because most of the time you think of squirrels as being, long, bushy-tailed animals that, bound around in trees. So, and yeah, they did a lot of the measurements for this. There's a lot of morphospace stuff. I don't believe there's any art of what the squirrels would have looked like, but I think we can all kind of go, I bet it looked like a squirrel. Oh, is this one changed in the last bit? I think this one has actually changed in the last bit. So the Rhynie chert is this fossil formation in the UK that preserves some of the oldest terrestrial ecosystems, so land-based ecosystems. And for a long time, people were going, oh yeah, these are just all fungus fossils, right? And I think in the last week or two even, some of that's been questioned a little bit as to whether they're fungus or if they're their whole own thing. But some of them most likely are, and that's because if I just Google it, will I be able to find the images instead of needing to download the paper? That's the question. Yeah. So you're getting some of these little spores and such that are just very indicative of mushrooms, right? So it's like, okay, cool, we are actually getting real mushrooms. So even if those other things aren't mushrooms, these are. So yeah, again, like this is 410 million years old. And again, the first life crawling out of the oceans, essentially. And it's really easy to go, well, what do you mean? Fungus don't live in the ocean? They do, actually. They evolved there with everything else. And now they just happen to be much more common, or more commonly thought of as being land-based organisms. So, yeah, the Rhynie chert, it's got some interesting stuff on it. Okay, this one should be a download. Yep, we're going to do that. And open. This is Prionylurus, which, if you search that, it's a living genus. It's these little teeny tiny spotted wildcats that are in Asia. This one comes from a human fossil site in China, and really interestingly, based on what it is, it would rival the modern day Prionylurus species for being the smallest one, maybe. I do have questions about it being found at a hominid site. This is Middle Pleistocene, so it's still before like Homo sapiens would have gotten here, from my understanding. But if it's on a hominid site, there's kind of there's three options. It got washed into the same cave as everything else. It was close to a pet and they kind of kept it around, or potentially it was eaten. It's not a very complete fossil. It's just, this little piece of a jawbone. So we don't see any marks that suggest any of those are more likely than the others. But I like cats, so I'm like, no, it should be a pet. That's my take on it, at least. Okay. And then also using pig teeth to analyze some previous to look at fossil pig teeth, because pigs do a lot of different things. Some are much more herbivorous, some are much more omnivorous. I actually in one of the lab meetings I was in, we got told how one of the grad students for their masters had put in radio trackers on some snakes, and one of them got eaten by pigs. So again, pigs will do a lot of different things depending on what species of pig it is and based on the kind of teeth it has. So what they found is there are some generalists here. There are some that are a bit more specific. I really do appreciate this. There's no primates here, right? So they're not eating a lot of the fruit, which means a lot of that fruit is falling to the ground, which means that fruit can then be eaten by a lot of these pigs that would have existed at the time. And, probably that kind of relationship existed almost up to modernity, since there weren't, again, many primates that were climbing in the trees in Southern Europe, because this is from a Spanish site. So, yeah, they just, are doing all of this dental work. Ooh, you're looking at the teeth and seeing where the peaks and valleys are, and then you can run your analysis and kind of see where they're eating. I think this is the one that I was thinking of at first. Here we go. This is the Sanus, right? Yeah, Sanus. So Sanus are South American native ungulates, and they're this really weird group of mammals that seem like they're related to modern day ungulates, but we really don't know, because they kind of just pop up out of nowhere after the mass extinction that killed off the non-bird dinosaurs. And so it's like, okay, well, are they or aren't they? Great question. Anyway, they're also talking about this trackway being accessible, which is interesting, because it's like, okay, well, if it's accessible, are people going to be coming here for ecotourism? Hey, come see the tracks. And you can see some of the trackways up here. These are three-toed animals. They're from the Miocene, and you have it's some of these names. Macroecology. I'm still saying it wrong. It's a trackway made by one of these Sanus. Let me actually just put in South American native ungulates. They're weird. There's a lot of them. And someone's saying hello from upstate New York. Okay. Howdy. And like I said, they come in all kinds of varieties, right? So we have trackways for them. They're talking about potentially doing ecotourism, which I know with the Navajo Nation near where I live, there are some dinosaur trackways that do bring in a decent amount of tourism. So makes sense. If someone, okay, so someone is, I addressed the baby Homotherium thing earlier, because that's where I'm at in the comments. I think the stream is running a little bit behind for you guys, so I'm seeing comments that are from a little bit earlier. But yeah, Homotherium, I don't think we're gonna be able to clone it. If we did, I think it would need to be preserved in like specific nature reserves, zoos, and things that are doing conservation work, especially things that have done big cat conservation work. Because normally from what we know, they probably would have been on grasslands and hunting mostly on grasslands. And there's not a lot of healthy grasslands in the modern day. So it's hard to say. Okay. And then this one's all about biases. I mean, I basically just got a little bit here. I don't have access to it. And it's largely statistics, but basically they're saying that in modern day communities of animals, you're going to get 50 to 60% herbivores. And then basically when we're looking at what we have in the fossils that are collected, it's not that kind of makeup, which is an issue. the idea is that just fossil biases towards predators are larger, right? Oh, do I want to collect a new horse or do I want to collect a new saber-toothed tiger, right? Like it's just that kind of bias. Slovenia, man, I'm getting people from all over today. Great to see, great to see. Slovenia or Slovenia? Slovenia. Pronunciation stuff. Regardless, so we still do get a good number of herbivores. It's just due to the sheer number of them, though. So, if you have fewer large predators or small predators, the smaller ones you're probably going to get eaten by the larger ones as well. But you're just going to have that 50-60% kind of enriched in the fossil record just because of what's able to fossilize. And it's what animals are the most common. So, yeah, it's just doing a bunch of statistics on fossil biases and collection biases based on comparisons to modern communities. Okay. And then this one's interesting. This is a lake ecosystem from the early Jurassic. So the early Jurassic is kind of... mass extinction happens at the Permian Triassic. There's all kinds of things that die. We start getting a lot of modern groups in the Triassic, but also a lot of weird things. By the early Jurassic, a lot of those really weird things have died out, and we start getting really similar to modern day ecosystems. And that includes here, where it's a lacustrine ecosystem, which means it's a lake. And really interestingly, there is evidence of, I believe there's a figure for it, but it's Bichanopliosaurus, which is, if I can find the dang thing, there we go, full-size image. I believe that's G, right? Am I insane? Yeah, so this is parts of it, and this is part of it. It's a plesiosaur. It's a short-necked plesiosaur that would have been like the top predator in this lake, which is not normally where you think of plesiosaurs as being, but this one did, and seemingly did fairly well. And again, this is just really kind of a summary that's like, hey, there's a lot of stuff happening. We have these really large predators. We have a lot of varieties of fish and turtle bits and things. So, really good look at what was happening, at least in this portion of the world, right after the end Triassic extinction, when modern ecosystems started to really start showing up in the fossil record. I mean, minus, the giant plesiosaurine predator, but when we're thinking about tetrapod predators being dominant in a lot of these ecosystems, like otters, crocodilians, etc. Oh, shoot. Sorry. I knocked over my microphone. I apologize. When we're thinking about those being in the modern ecosystem, like tetrapods are becoming the top predators in those ecosystems. And even non-amphibian related ones. So these are clown beetles, which are often kind of squat. They're a little smushed a lot of the time. They're very round. Today there's 3,900 species or more. Lots of diversity. There's issues about them being in Burmese amber, which I have whole videos on if you are interested in me discussing this. But we have figure 4, which is, here you go, here's the phylogeny of them, where there's a lot of these that are coming from the amber. And we're seeing that they're already pretty diverse by the middle of the Cretaceous when this amber would have been deposited on. And then if we scroll down to 11, 7, fig 9, fig 10, figure 11. I like this one just because it helps to show just where a lot of the little traits are that they're looking at on it. So, again, you're finding all the various pieces. Portugal as well. Okay, either pronunciation for Slovenia. Now I don't know which way I said it the first time. I'll have to go back and watch again. It's so great seeing so many people from all over the world. I love this. This is like one of the best parts about doing the live streams. I get to see everyone popping in and saying hi. Anyway, so yeah, this is just looking at these beetles. Again, beetles are the most diverse group on the planet right now. So understanding more about them is generally good because almost no matter where you are, you will find one. They're important for the ecosystems. This one's largely just looking at all systematics of scorpions. Did I not put in the right link? Okay, I guess I didn't. I got there regardless. Again, you're looking at like some of these crown group scorpions where it's like, okay, these are definite scorpions. Scotland, the Carboniferous, has some great stuff, and then you get a lot of them from different coal places, also Carboniferous, but it's kind of the Mississippian versus the Pennsylvanian, where in the U.S. and many other places the Carboniferous is split into two, and in the U.K. it is not. So, and then various other places I assume also do or don't depending on who you are. I just know those two. And again, you're getting a lot of these from amber then as you get closer to the modern day. Figure 2. And so here you go. This is kind of where we have our big distribution is during the Carboniferous when there's more oxygen in the air, and then a lot during the Cretaceous, which is interesting because that's when the angiosperm revolution is happening. And you don't think of scorpions as being, inherently linked to fruit trees, but seemingly something about fruit trees showing up increased their abundance, or at least increased their ability to get fossilized. It could be either one of those things. It could be a combination of both. But for whatever reason, we get suddenly more fossils of them as angiosperm flowering plants, fruit-bearing plants start to really explode in the diversity. So, and figure 9, I also told myself to go look at. Oh, that's the wrong. Let me click that one. There we go. 4, 6, 7, 8, 9. Oh, there we go. Yeah, and this is just kind of showing some of these changes that we see in the body shape, with the Silurian one being one of the oldest, and having stouter legs, probably still being pretty attached to water. It may have actually needed to go into the water to molt. And then you start getting into Silurian Proscorpius, probably a little bit more on land. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 parts of the body. And when you get to the modern day ones, they actually only have 5 little segments through the body. And that's something that's pretty consistent across all scorpions as far as I know. Question mark? I'm sure there's a Chelicerae expert out there who could correct me. But yeah, just interesting to see the trends that they have throughout their evolution. And this is about finding cryptic species, which cryptic species are kind of like, well, is it its own species or is it the same thing as the other one? A great example is in it's not there. There we go. Narrow-headed garter snakes. This is actually what I work with in the lab at NAU. Narrow-headed garter snakes. Their sister species, this is Thamnophis rufipunctatus. The sister species is Thamnophis nigronictalis, which lives in Mexico. And they're both mountain dwelling, and there's some debate as to whether or not they're different species. It's hard to know. This paper tried to find if they could do that with agamid lizards, which is just one group of lizards. They looked at a bunch of isolated skulls, or a few isolated skulls, and then a bunch of modern examples. And 30 to 40% of the different species of agamids, meaning they don't interbreed, they don't really interact with each other at all, have no significant differences in their skull shape. Which, it's not exactly a one-to-one comparison when you're trying to compare things in the fossil record, right? You don't have a ton of examples. But it means that maybe we are missing a lot of these cryptic species. Just because we don't have the data to be able to back up any significant differences. I know there are some people working on this, and I'm very excited for that person to publish their work. But he needs to get out. It's out as a preprint, but I'm gonna wait because it could be very important as far as conclusions that are being drawn from it. So James Napoli, hurry up. Anyway, moving on. This is an unnamed pterosaur from the early Cretaceous of Colombia because it's just not very complete. However, it's enough to say that it probably was like Anhanguera, which is one of the Anhanguera. There you go. There you go. You know, one of these kind of what we think of as mostly seagoing or potentially seagoing predators that are catching squid or fish near the ocean surface. So that's kind of what we're thinking of. This animal is also being, interestingly, Anhanguera is also known from Brazil. So potentially it is the same species, and we just don't have enough to say that for sure. But yeah, new pterosaur material. We're finding more of it. Okay, so this plant group is known for being toxic, at least in the modern day. And so actually in South America, that's what they use for the curare. When they make poison darts, they'll use some of this plant for some of those. It's found across most equatorial regions today, but importantly, this one is from in between the intertrapian beds of the Deccan Traps. Deccan Traps, big volcanoes that are erupting with a ton of lava in India, and so you get big layer of lava, some sediments, big layer of lava, some sediments, just kind of like that. This one is kind of in the middle. You can see here where the different fossil examples are, with this one being the oldest during the late Cretaceous. So it's really interesting to see. Okay, cool. They were around before the end of the Cretaceous. The rock hit, and then they started to seemingly diversify and show up more in the fossil record. But it's also interesting because at this time, India would have been like in the middle of the Indian Ocean. So how they got everywhere else is another great question that somebody could ask in the future. But it is neat. Okay. And oh, this is this one. Sorry, there's two of them because there was also a little puff piece on it that I had linked, and I want to make sure I grab the right one. This one is basically just trying to reconstruct a food web, and the way they did that is they looked at fossil poop and they looked at fossil regurgitates, so things that had been thrown up. And these are in the Triassic Polish Basin with Smokwoleski, which I also have a video on where I pronounce it wrong the entire time, so apologies to the Polish. Regardless, you can kind of see how you have some of these communities here, but as you start getting into the Jurassic, you're starting to get larger communities with larger predators. Whereas a lot of these dinosaurian predators are mostly eating small things. They're not necessarily going after large prey. This includes with Lizovicia, which is this really big dicynodont from Poland. Dicynodonts being mammal relatives, but not directly on the lineage to mammals, and would have been the largest herbivore in its environment, at least. So that's what we're getting there. Again, figures. What they were doing is looking at fossil poop and CT scanning it. So this is probably from Smokwoleski, where you have trace marks on bones where it was chewing on it, but also you have coprolites with pieces of its teeth in it, which means it was probably breaking off some of its own teeth and just swallowing them as it was eating everything else. That's really not the strangest thing in the world. You also have the Silosaurs potentially eating some insects and whatnot, plant material, which is what we expect for them. So this is what we're doing, and then you start getting into your Jurassic stuff with, oh yeah, this is like, it's eating a sauropod, it's not eating, just a little thing. So it's kind of how did dinosaurs come to be? Well, they just started eating larger stuff, and we have the poop to show it. Okay. Yeah, and then just kind of showing it again. During the late Carnian, you don't have a ton of ecospace. You have these little bits of niche replacement occurring where a few dinosaurs or dinosaur relatives are starting to fill in little parts of the ecosystem. and then you start to fill in more and more of it. And in this one, they're calling Smokvovaleski a dinosaur. That's still up for debate until we have more fossils of it. But regardless, it was living in a way similar to a dinosaur if it was not a dinosaur. So that's that one. People saying hi in the chat, saying hi to each other. It's good to see, good to see. So this one is looking at crocodilians do walk on land quite a bit sometimes even. And historically in the fossil record, there were tons that walked around just on land basically all the time. Right? They didn't live in an environment where they were going to be swimming a lot. They were just walking around, and they were very good at it. This is basically just a summary of what terrestrial adaptations they would have had. And here you can see one of these really early crocodilomorphs, Terrestroseuchus, which that animal very clearly is not built to be a swimmer. It certainly could have swam, but that is not what it was doing with its life. That was not its goal. It was not a Michael Phelps. Again, some of these other ones, you can see that they're walking around. It covers a lot. It is just largely a review of everything about non-aquatic or semi-aquatic crocodilians. So if you're interested in this one, go for it. It's open access, I believe. So otherwise, send me an email. I'll send it to you. I can download it as a PDF. So yeah, they just cover a ton, and I love these crocodilians. Crocodilians that don't do croc things that we think of today, best. How long does it take me to read a paper? It depends on the paper and how interested I am how interested I am in the paper, and then also how familiar I am with the methods being used. Because there's times where it's like, oh, this is all geochemistry. I almost understand some of it. There's other times where it's like, here's some basic ecological comparisons. It's like, okay, great. I understand that fine. So it depends. Yeah. So, I mean, it really is just the important thing to keep in mind because I see in the comments you're talking about, struggling to get through some of the papers, skip the methods section most of the time. Like genuinely read the, abstract so you get a sense of what they did, read the introduction so you have the background information, and read the results and conclusions. Maybe discussion if there's discussion too, right? Like you don't need the methods for the most part, and that's where it normally gets caught up in the weeds a whole lot. I think by doing that, you're going to help streamline the process, and you don't need to read it in order, right? You can read the abstract, read the conclusions, and then go back through and do the introduction. I recommend the introduction before the conclusions, but that way you can start really understanding just what they did and how they did it. And then, methods, people can complain about methods all the time. Or you can complain about conclusions. There's plenty of papers where they talk about their methods, and it's like, okay, their methods are fine. Their conclusions seem a little iffy. So, it's just one of those things. Anyway, on to the next one. This is the platyhelminthes, which, if you don't know what that is, they're flatworms, right? Yeah. Flatworms. They don't really have a great fossil record, believe it or not. Being all soft-bodied and also small isn't really great. They do have some fossils, though. It's just not a ton. Whoop. Here's some of the different thoughts for some of the evidence of them. And a lot of these are actually based on trace fossils. So like these ones where you have the little pearl that's in here that's forming a gall around it. That's something that we see with modern day bivalves when they're being harassed, parasitized by flatworms. So it's something that we do see. So yeah, let me get to, okay. Is that the main thing? I think that is the main thing. Yeah, so it's basically just doing a summary of this and then trying to go, okay, this basically lines up with the genetic clock, because flatworms you might think of as being this, oh, well, they're obviously one of the oldest animal groups. Not really. They're actually really from what we know, they basically showed up towards the Permian in high numbers. And then there's a few that showed up kind of in the Devonian. So still a few tens of millions of years after the Cambrian explosion. And from what we can tell, the evidence that we have of these different kinds of traces that they do leave in the modern day, that they would leave in the fossil record, yeah, it basically lines up with what the genetic data would say is kind of Devonian era origination point for the platyhelminths, for the flatworms. This is Bolivia, correct? Yep, so this is Hillickness. And so this is actually from a site with dinosaur fossils, dinosaur track fossils. But the fossil is different. It's this kind of shape. And so this is Hillickness. And so the idea is that it is a clam that is buried in the sand, and then it kind of, is able to poke out. So it goes through a bunch of layers of sediment, and can stretch out pretty far, as you can see in B of this figure. So, yeah, it really helps to suggest that this area was the edge of a lake or a sea as opposed to a floodplain, which is interesting because we have all these tracks and it's really easy to go, well, obviously this is a floodplain. That's where we're getting this. Instead, it just seems like whatever dinosaurs were hanging around in this part of Bolivia just really enjoyed being on the edge of a lake, which, once you get out too far, you are at risk of drowning or being predated upon by a crocodilian or something, depending on how large of a dinosaur you are. And then also you're kind of exposing yourself by being out in the open where predators on land can also find you. So it's really interesting to see that there was a lot of activity on the edge of this lake shore. Or seashore. We don't know which. I will be fair there. Okay, sorry, just checking comments. Okay, cool. This one is going with footprints as well, but this is with if it loads, there we go. So this is just showing that two hominids lived alongside each other. This is Homo erectus and Paranthropus boisei, which it's just two tracks in kind of the same layer of mud that are very clearly from different individuals. Also, there's some other stuff there too, but it helps you just show that, yeah, there were multiple species of humans or human-like animals living in the same environments as hominids started to diversify in Africa. And then, of course, there's all the other evolution that happened with Neanderthals and the Denisovans and stuff, but this is this is a little bit older than that. So, apologies as well for the little burp I had there. Okay. And so this one's also in Spain. This is looking at a span of about 25 million years that took place during the Cretaceous. And there's all kinds of lagoons and swamps and deltas everywhere. And specifically, you're looking at Desmiophilum, which it shows up in all of these different environments, which means it was clearly a very important part of the ecosystem, right? Because again, you're getting Gutsick Gibbon covered this paper. If that is the trackway one, that sounds like something they would do. I don't normally delve too much into human evolution. Human evolution just isn't my thing. I don't know what to tell you. It's like, oh yeah, neat. Moving on. So yeah, there are people who are much more interested in that who would be better for discussing the implications of that paper. But you're not going to get people talking about plant fossils in Spain from anyone else. Unfortunately, the internet's still running slow, so I can't show you quite all the detail. But again, still, just this plant was very key to this ecosystem in Europe and specifically in Spain for 25 million years of the Cretaceous, which is a big, long span of time. Staying in trees, we're actually jumping to not Australia, actually, despite it saying Australia. We're actually looking at fossils from Argentina of Eucalyptus, and what they did is they went, okay, well, let's see what damage looks like on modern eucalyptus. Let's see what it looks like in fossil eucalyptus leaves. And it turns out it's basically the same. There were 28 different types of damage in the modern eucalyptus trees, and we found basically the exact same 28 types of damage in the fossil ones, meaning that the insects that cause that damage in the eucalyptus trees have a very long history, because these fossils are about 52 million years old. So for at least 52 million years, insects in eucalyptus trees have been fighting the same war. So, yeah, it's neat. And again, you can see the fossils are from Argentina, but here's the eucalyptus modern range, where there's a little bit in the Philippines, some in Indonesia, and then New Guinea and Australia are really where they're the most common. Oh, I have a duplicate, so I can get rid of that one. Okay, and this one is, was Paleolake Messel a death trap? Insights from modern bat drownings. So it's hard to get data for how many bats drown. However, in certain places, we have a whole bunch of pools around. So this was basically collecting data from people with pools and how many bats got drowned per year and that kind of thing. So the idea is that Messel would have been a potentially volcanic sink where there would have been a lot of CO2 beneath it, that if there was an eruption, an earthquake or something, it could dislodge that, kind of like in Lake Nyos and I think Cameroon. Maybe Nigeria, I don't recall. One of those two. Where, you know, all the CO2 was released and suddenly like everything in a vicinity of the lake died. Potentially, if that happened, the bats would also just fall into the water and also die and become fossilized. So it was basically doing a statistical analysis of, well, how many bats, is there an abnormally large number of bats that died in Lake Messel? And what they found is that it was a big fossil lake with approximately 6 to 9 bats drowning every year. Whereas the pools are much smaller, so you're not going to get as large, but they are distributed. Slowing down. The pools are smaller, but are distributed more broadly, and they only got about 2 per year. So the null hypothesis being there will be no difference, it does beat the null. There is a difference, which does suggest that, yeah, there was probably something going on with this kind of cyclicity in the lake, where occasionally you would have these eruptions that would kill bats in flight essentially and have them fall into the lake, where they could then be fossilized, which is why we have some very nice fossils of bats from the lake. And you can see this kind of depression here where they're trying to show, like, yeah, it's a sink where there's degassing from volcanic activity occurring. So really need a taphonomic study to try and understand the environment that the animals were living in. This one's interesting because it's talking about how there was a loss of shrub cover as the first Australians actually moved in, and that seems to be through some controlled fire and controlled burning. People did that in the Americas as well. I know that was one of the big things, at least in this part of the United States, in Western North America, is the Native Americans would do controlled burns. Not necessarily with, you know, the same precision as modern day firefighting crews, but they would still do them because it was important to have that cleared undergrowth so that you can actually like move around in the environment. Because, for example, in Flagstaff, Arizona, there are too many trees now, and they are all about the same age because it coincides exactly with when European settlers moved into the region and started to just stop every fire, and so suddenly all these trees are exactly the same size, and there are too many of them for the natural kind of cover you would expect. Still, so you're starting to get some of this burning. There's one figure in here. Did I write down which one it was? Nope. Yeah, but generally there's an increase in fires in southeastern Australia and a 50% reduction in shrubs. And now there's more of that coming back, as again, controlled burns haven't been happening as much, which is why you're starting to get some of these really large burns. I thought there was one more figure that was nicer. Oh, this one. Here we go. Now you're starting to get a lot of this shrub cover that's happening, which means if there's a fire and you have less of that, it's less likely to catch all of these trees on fire because it can't get up high enough. but now you can, which is why you're starting to see some of these really devastating wildfires in Australia. And again, we've already seen that in the United States as well. So yeah, it's unfortunate that, like, hey, you know, the people who have lived here for centuries, millennia, they kind of know what they're doing. Crazy. So yeah, it's unfortunate that probably contributed to some of the extinctions that have happened in Australia as well, and some of the dangers that they're facing. Again, we've seen large wildfires there recently. So this is looking at coelacanths, and it is fantastic because it's, you know, basically a 3D preservation of one, which doesn't normally happen. Normally when fish are preserved, they're kind of smushed. I want to see how pretty it is. But this is from the Triassic of France, so this is before coelacanths really became these deep sea living organisms that we think of them as today. And so this is Grallia brachiodontata, which is a new genus, new species, all that kind of stuff. They did some micro CT scans of the skull, and because it was preserved in 3D, it's, you know, really easy to see. You can even see it loading in now, and it'll get there. It'll get there. There you go. So yeah, you can see, you know, where every bone is. The skull isn't quite the same as modern ones. Is there a better figure for that somewhere in the paper? I don't want to have to scroll through as much as I would want to. All right, but they're looking at the whole body as well. I mean, there's a ton of it here. It's really well preserved, which is just incredible, right? Like having it be preserved this incredibly is very nice. Fish, again, do not fossilize well. Lots of thin, skinny bones that break. Lots of active predation and stuff in the oceans to, you know, havoc it eaten, scavenging and whatnot. So getting a fossil of this quality is pretty unique. Is there not a? There may not be one. There we go. Yeah, come on. Okay, it's gonna take forever to load. Oh, no, it's not. Okay, neat. And yeah, so here you're getting your group. This is into the Masoniids, which is this group of fairly large and mostly river-dwelling coelacanths. So yeah, it's kind of right there at the beginning of them. Chinlia is from petrified forest, so my neck of the woods. Good to see. It's good to see that it's there. And then a lot of these survived all the way into the Cretaceous. So really nice reconstruction of a coelacanth there, so you can start really seeing how their skulls would have functioned. Hopefully that'll have more work done in the future, where they're actually measuring kind of what gape it could have had. It's hard to measure what's not there when the animal's mouth is closed, but as they open, they suction feed, so they draw in water and food. So hopefully there will be some work getting done with some of that, so we can try and understand what they were, maybe what they were feeding on. So yeah, this one is also going to be another thing that was on ice. This is a juvenile woolly rhino. Where am I? There I am. This actually looked at some of the hump on it, and since this one's young, there's been this question of, okay, well, was this heavily muscled the way it is in modern rhinos, where they have this kind of hump on their back because they need to hold up their big head with the big horn and all this stuff? Or was it just a fat storage thing because the woolly rhinos are living somewhere much colder? And at least in the juvenile ones, it was fat storage, which then brings the question of, okay, well, can we find an adult one to actually see if maybe it wasn't always fat storage? Maybe it changed throughout its lifetime. So it is kind of bringing up some interesting questions. Woolly rhinos, I believe similarly, we're probably not going to be able to clone just because the time period is too separate from their relatives. But I don't know, maybe. This is basically just looking at the kind of fat that it is, because I said it was a fatty hump. And that also could have changed throughout its lifetime, because there's some fats that are better for more rapid energy storage and some that are better for long term. I do not recall which, because it has been a hot minute since I have taken that class, and I don't deal with soft tissues, so. Okay. And this one is, there we go. So the Weddell line is interesting. So the Weddell line exists between Indonesia and New Guinea and whatnot, right? So it's essentially just where continental plates are coming, there's the big trench there. But it means that when ocean levels were lower, animals could not just get across it nice and easily. And unfortunately, it is taking forever. Well, the paper is at least called the Weddell line. Oh, here we go. It is this one right here. The Weddell line, an early Cenozoic biogeographical barrier among southern hemisphere terrestrial mammals. And it's basically saying, hey, even as far back as the very early Cenozoic, so just after the extinction that killed off the dinosaurs, the Weddell line still existed, just based on different trends of what animals are getting where. Unfortunately, there's not pretty pictures to show you. Did it download? Oh, it did download. Never mind. Hang on. I can show you pictures. There we go. Here we go. Hopefully I can show you some pictures. There's discussion, and since it's in this format, that means I think you should get down to the bottom, and then there should be figures. Or at least lists of taxa, right? So it's looking at what animals lived where, were they able to cross this barrier, and it's, no, they weren't able to. So that is what is going on with those animals, right? It's just, hey, this specific barrier to dispersal existed as far back as 50, 60 million years ago. Okay, give me one moment. Okay. All right, so this one's looking at Carcharodontosaurids in Uzbekistan. If you remember Ulubegsaurus, that was one of these. However, now we have more material where we actually found a vertebra, which is slightly tall, which they describe as being, quote, similar to Acrocanthosaurus. And I don't know if I actually can find the vertebra in here. I know I found it at one point. Oh, yeah, it's just this one. There you go. We're getting this kind of projection up here coming off the top. And again, if it is similar to Acrocanthosaurus, that's interesting, because there was another animal like that described just a little while ago coming from South America. So maybe the earliest Carcharodontosaurids just had tall spines. Maybe. Again, hard to know for sure, but it is certainly interesting. And it is just providing more evidence that, like, yes, this is a large Carcharodontosaurid that would have been present in this environment. And this is one of the last places they would have been potentially, but phylogenetically, it could line up more with Acrocanthosaurus. The issue is we just need more of it. So hopefully we'll find some more of it and be able to actually run some better testing on what it was related to, how they evolved, all that kind of stuff. So there is that. Okay. P.A. Bruno says, cheers, thank you. Okay, so this is a new Ankylosaurid. This is Huaxia Shoen. It's an early one. I believe there is a phylogeny that I can access. But fairly complete, which is really nice. Unfortunately, it does have the classic Ankylosaur issue of either having the tail club or having the skull, but not both. And in this case, it's the tail club. Most of the time we actually do find Ankylosaurs, they're normally missing one of these two things. But it's a really early diverging one. Comes from southern China. So there's a lot of questions about taxonomy, which is essentially, when do the Ankylosaurs with tail clubs evolve out of the Ankylosaurs without tail clubs? And so this one might be useful in the future for starting to answer that, because it seems like it's one of the really early Ankylosaurids, meaning it would have had the tail club. So hopefully we'll get some more work on those. There's a lot of stuff coming out of China with Ankylosaurs recently, so, and Mongolia for that matter. So hopefully we'll get some good stuff. Oh, this is also a fun one. This is Darren Niche's paper. Darren Niche, right? Yeah. Where he's talking about, hey, Brian Ford's Too Big to Walk book is kind of full of crap. Brian Ford is a scientist. I'm using the word somewhat loosely, who published a book saying, oh, well, the dinosaurs went extinct because all of the water dried up and they couldn't survive because obviously they had to be aquatic because they were too big to walk, which basically just ignores all of the last 50 years of biomechanics on dinosaurs. That's unfair. That ignores the last 70 years of biomechanics on dinosaurs. So yeah, this is basically just Darren Niche trying to have something that is published so that scientists can point at this paper and go, this paper expressly deals with all of the issues of too big to walk, because there are people who now believe that because the book was an officially published book. Apparently it wasn't peer reviewed, so it's an issue. So it's very nice to have somebody who is someone in the field publish a direct response to the issues with the book. So there's also discussions about how Brian Ford went, oh, you guys believe that they could walk? Well, that's fake news. And so it's also just like this general anti-science trend of you can't just go, well, that's fake in face of evidence. That's just not a healthy outlook to have on life. This one's also interesting. This one is looking at, and I can really just talk about it from here. So this is the dodo. This is the Rodriguez solitaire, which is closely related, but on a smaller island. They're both extinct now, to be fair. But essentially, there was more space on Mauritius where the dodo was. So they just kind of like hung around and ate fruit and just chilled. Because of differing sea levels, at certain points, Rodriguez Island got very small. And so they developed these really large club-like projections on their wings for fighting one another. And so it's essentially like, well, okay, well, if there's this much space on Mauritius, then the dodo can just hang around here in this low aggression thing. But eventually, as things start to get more competitive, you're going to end up trapped on this smaller area where you're going to be competing. And until there's enough space to get you back over this tipping point, you're going to just stay aggressive. And so that's seemingly what happened with the Rodriguez solitaire. If there's anything you learned over the last several years, it's that misinformation spreads much easier than previously thought. It is much easier to tell an incorrect lie than tell an accurate truth, or something along those lines. There's something about that. It takes more time to correct something that's wrong than to spread something that's wrong. Yeah. It is an issue. Now, for the Italian, Alfio Alessandro Chiarenza, he is great at doing different modeling stuff. Like, genuinely, he's great at this. So he was doing a lot of this. It's hard to know exactly what the ecology of a lot of animals would have been, but he was essentially just trying to set up a larger scale model to try and understand what parts of paleontology we need to improve. And this is the important part. Macroevolution is, how species diverge and stuff. And we're really great at doing that when we're talking about dinosaurs. Macroecology is how they lived and stuff. Very clearly, it is not mentioned nearly as much. And even when you're looking for both, it's still not mentioned very much. So it's unfortunate that people aren't really looking at kind of the ecology, how these animals would have lived. This is kind of laying out a groundwork for many different things. He mentions Bergman's rule here, which is essentially, hey, animals that are closer to the poles, that are in colder environments, tend to be larger. That was something that was just tested, and like the fact that we're only just testing it now after over 100 years, was it 200 years now of dinosaur science, because Megalosaurus was named in 1824, I think. So 200 years of dinosaur science, and we're barely starting to mention some of these things and starting to discuss how these animals might have lived, is not ideal. And here's where he's showing part of this, where these are things that are like automatically filtering our knowledge. Like, we don't know about this happening, that this Tarbosaurus is eating this Dinocheirus, because it got eaten. So if there's no bones left, how do we know that that's an interaction that happened? So it's talking about the limits that are being posed, that exist in doing this, but also just how we can start trying to approach some of these processes. And I do like his quote. I have a quote here from the paper. Deep time macroecology can direct public fascination with dinosaurs towards understanding the impact of climate change on ecosystem evolution. This is crucial for our modern society and underscores the role of dinosaur paleontologists in addressing these issues. So yeah, like going back to misinformation is really easy to spread. This is one way to combat it, by looking at how people are interested in how dinosaurs lived. If we can start doing more stuff like this, we can get them invested in the science again. So it's good stuff. Oh, I made a copy of that one as well. Cool. Okay, an Ediacaran again, but this time it's looking more at genetics. So this is metazoa, is animals, right? That's the animal kingdom, is metazoa, just for context. So this is looking at the genetics of them, the molecular clock, and they find that it's pretty likely that animals first evolved in the Ediacaran, but then they also diversified in the late Ediacaran and then into the Cambrian. So the Cambrian explosion is correct and incorrect, because it technically started a little bit bigger, but it continued into the Cambrian. The Cambrian is just when we start getting better conditions for fossilization. And so you can see that here where, okay, cool, here's metazoa evolving in the Ediacaran, and we start to get all of these other things, right? Where you start getting the spread of various organisms as you start getting into the late Ediacaran and then into the Cambrian, where you have all of your basic groups. Your chordates, your vertebrates is what that is. Ecdysozoans are things that shed their skin, so arthropods, so insects, crustaceans and such. Like, you're starting to get those crown groups here in the Cambrian and Ediacaran. It's just really narrowing down that timeline of when animals started to animal. And as for wonderful fossils, there's always, people who are like, well, where's the missing link for blank? And in this case, we can go, it's right here. Here's Skiphosoura, which is a pterosaur coming from, I believe this one's Germany, right? Did I get that right? It's been a minute since I read this and wrote this section. Yeah, Solnhofen. So yeah, this is another one of the German ones. But you can see here, it makes this really great paraphyletic grade, which means you can't group off just these animals before Pterodactyloidea without also including Pterodactyloidea, right? You can't say, well, we have the common ancestor here, and we're going to include everything but Pterodactyloidea. You can't do that because Pterodactyloidea is well within that group. But basically, we're finding, as that other figure showed, exactly what was expected based on the fossils we had, which is, yeah, we expect these things to kind of have their skulls change shape to be, a little smaller teeth as opposed to the large teeth and things like Rhamphorhynchus and Jark. But also we're expecting them to start having shorter tails. And it's like, oh yeah, it fits in perfectly. It is exactly what you expect. It's not an unexpected fossil. It fits all previous hypotheses. It is wonderful. So that's really nice to see. There's times where you're doing science and you propose a hypothesis and you find out it's wrong. And then there's times where you have a hypothesis and you find something new and it's like, oh yeah, no, we were dead on. We're not insane people. Ediacaran again. This is Uncas Zaugisi. Oh, I had access to this, I thought. Oh well, I thought I did. Here it is. It's an Ediacaran worm type fossil. It probably shed its skin, meaning it would have been one of those ecdysozoans I mentioned earlier. So that means it could actually even be closer to things like nematodes, because they also do that. They're ecdysozoans as well. But like I said, it's from the Ediacaran. That's when we think these things were diversifying. So we're just finding more fossils to help support a lot of these ideas on kind of how these animals were developing, when they were developing, and starting to evolve. And then we're looking at Imperabator. Imperabator is a dinosaur coming from Antarctica. And it was just kind of like, it's some sort of Coelurosaur. Coelurosaurs being everything from Tyrannosaurus rex to the birds to ornithomimids and therizinosaurs. It's a big group. This one, it wasn't the most complete fossil in the world. But now they looked at it and they went, oh, hey, look, we have different traits that suggest it's an unilogene, which is a group of raptor dinosaurs, dromaeosaurs, that are mostly from South America. You can see the larger claw there, so that's how they're interpreting that. But they may have been fish eaters. And you can see it here. That makes a really, it doesn't make a really nice, pretty tree in all of these, but it makes a decent tree in some of them. But they might have been fish eaters. So that's going to be things like Osteoraptor, yay! Long, skinny snout. This is from the Isle, but the design's more or less fine. Maybe a little overly long on the snout, but the teeth are slightly recurved, but getting towards smoother. So it's kind of a, okay, well, it may have just been targeting small prey. Let's use Aguatos. Aguatos is best paleo artist if it loads in. If it doesn't load in, he's still the best paleo artist, in my opinion. Or at least he's up there. There's a couple of really good ones. Regardless, maybe it was targeting smaller prey is kind of just the idea with these guys. But it's from Antarctica in the case of Imperabator. So it's good to see that we're getting better understandings of the Antarctican animals. Okay, and this is a two-parter here because this is about Patagomaya, which was described as a relatively large mammal a year or so ago, I believe. This one is going, hey, it might not actually be linked to modern-day mammals, the placental mammals. It might be a Gondwanatherian, which are kind of sister groups closely related to marsupials as far as we can tell. They may or may not have had a pouch. We don't know entirely. But they go, hey, this might be one of those. The next paper is a reply to that by the authors who initially named it, going, no, it's not. So I am not familiar enough with the phylogenetics of mammals to discuss in great detail which one I think it is. So I don't know. There's going to be discussion about what is it? Patagomaya. So hopefully that will be sorted at some point. Going back to our distant ancestors, we have the jawless fish. They didn't have jaws, but they did have tooth plates inside their mouth. And so this was a biomechanics paper to try and see how they would have worked. And what they found is, well, it couldn't, clamp shut and chew. It could probably still grasp and grind stuff together. So it was probably actively feeding as opposed to just, swimming through the water filter feeding. But it may have been either scavenging, and so, something dies, falls to the bottom of the ocean, and then it grinds them up, or potentially deposit feeding, meaning potentially it was scooping up sand and then, filtering out the dirt and eating whatever little organisms were in the sand. And so you can see some of those. That was one of the plates. Here's some more of the analysis on this for the shapes. I don't think they have a reconstruction of one swimming through the sand, but it would be really nice if they did, because I like pretty paleo art in my papers. Yeah, nothing like that in there. Okay. I don't know if Tyrannosaurus Rex is still in the chat, but I know he might have opinions on theropod locomotion. Just because I know who that is. And I know they do some stuff with that. This one is looking at the fibula. The fibula tends to get smaller in theropods, and you can see this in the bird in the guinea fowl, where the fibula, the smaller of the two lower leg bones, is just, it barely exists. And so this is probably driven by knee-based locomotion. So if you're thinking about a really large theropod like Tyrannosaurus rex or Allosaurus, you're going to be getting all of the motion coming from, pretend this is a leg, all of the motions coming from the hip, or the majority of the motions coming from the hip. Whereas in birds, the femur, pretend my upper arm bone is a femur now, basically stays in one place and they just pivot from the knee. And so that shift is probably what caused the reduction in the fibula size. And they, go through all kinds of stuff for biomechanics to help reinforce this idea. And you can see in Allosaurus, sure, it's smaller, but it's not as small. Deinonychus, again, as you're getting smaller, and then as you start getting into like birds, you're getting really into very small fibula territory. Okay. And then we have worm lizards. Yay, worm lizards. Amphisbaenans are the worm lizards, but they it's a lizard. Most of them don't have limbs at all. Let's just go to the wiki for it. And they look kind of like this. They look, ringed, so does the name. This is the world's largest one. It's a fossil. It is coming from the Eocene of Tunisia. And it has been named Pterosteodontosaurus Marcello Sanchezi. They're really interesting animals. You can see on one of these fossils when I get there, one of the traits that lets us know that it is an amphisbaenon. Colin, where are you? It's pretty. Oh, here we go. So there's 3 teeth right here, but also you might notice that this looks kind of like the tip of a snout, and that's because it is. Amphisbaenons, for whatever reason, have evolved to have a single tooth right in the middle of their face, and then even rows going on the other sides, but there's just one tooth right in the middle, which I just think is very interesting. Coming from the Eocene, it does suggest that a lot of these amphisbaenons were actually getting around from rafting, where essentially they would be trapped in various plant matter that got washed out to sea and then just kind of float, and eventually they landed on a different continent and were able to live there. Where is this stupid figure? There we go. So yeah, and blocky teeth, probably eating snails and other hard-shelled things. Yeah, they're great animals. They're wonderful. I love my reptiles. Yeah, people talking about paleo art in the chat. So, yep, there's all kinds of great paleo artists out there who do streams and stuff. And I typed like 3 of these twice. Okay, so I got rid of one more. Okay, there we go. Got rid of, meaning I covered it earlier and accidentally had it later in my notes. So this one's looking at the phylogenetic signals in the pectoral girdle of Thalattosuchia and Dinosauridae. Thalattosuchia are basically totally marine crocodilians. Dinosauridae had some that got pretty marine, but not necessarily totally marine. They're largely just looking at like the scapula of a lot of these things. You can see these here. They are very different in shapes depending on which organism you're looking at. And so it's just really looking at the musculature for those. Unless you're getting very deep into the weeds of musculature, a lot of this is just kind of like a, hey, this muscle goes here, this muscle goes here. Which, I'm hoping they'll do a little bit more with in the future as far as how adept each of these would have been in the water. Because my understanding is the Dinosaurids would have been more like modern crocodilians. And again, the Metriorhynchids, the Thalattosuchians would have been a lot more in the water. Someone in the chat, lizard worms are the weirdest things I didn't know existed until now. They're fantastic. I was gonna say, I think you said you're the person who said they were Slovenian, right? I can't remember if there's any in that region. I don't recall. unfortunately. Otherwise, I'd tell you to go try and find some. But anyway, yeah. So this was just basically looking at all that musculature. I briefly earlier mentioned early Jurassic plesiosaurs. Here's some early Jurassic plesiosaurs that are marine. These are from Germany. They're very partial, so there's not really anything named. But based on where they were able to plug it in, it's probably a pliosaur. So again, shorter necked, predatory. Here we go. There you go. It's kind of just in this, again, sort of grade into the pliosaurus type things. Although obviously, as you're looking at all of these pliosaurus species, you might be thinking to yourself, why are there so many of them? And the answer is, people just named a lot of things pliosaurus that may not be pliosaurus. So a lot of these probably just need to be redescribed. There's some issues with the phylogeny here. And I'm sure some people are working on that, because it's one of those things where it's like, well, yeah, everyone named all these things just pliosaurus. At some point, someone needs to just sit down and, like, as a PhD project, go through and describe all of those again. So, yep. And this one's fun. This one has been a back and forth. Oh, and this is the third paper of the back and forth. So, back and forth and back, I guess. This is about Cryptovaranoides, which was from the late Triassic and described as a squamate, meaning a lizard. Another paper came out and went, no, it's not. It's an archosauromorph. This is important because lizards that are like this one, Cryptovaranoides being the varanid lizards, so things more like monitor lizards, right? So Komodo dragon, Parenti, those kinds of ones. Those are very derived lizards. So finding that group in the Triassic would be kind of insane. It would kind of throw our genetic clock for lizards kind of out of the window. So it made sense that, like, okay, yeah, sure, it's an archosauromorph. And they're coming back in and going, no, it's not. There is an issue with different phylogenetic matrices. If you put a lizard in a bird matrix and code it for bird characters, it'll still tell you it's a bird, right? Now, in this lineage, they did find it near snakes or near the night lizards, depending on which tree you're in, because they have a few of them. But the really important part is actually here for this, I believe. Oh, come on. Be bigger. Nope. Okay. The teeth are pleurodont, which means if you have the jaw, let me move to camera on me. Hey. If you have the jaw, the teeth kind of sit attached to the side. They're not in a socket or anything. They're just attached to the side. And that's a pleurodont condition. That is something that, as far as we know, is unique to lizards. And it has that, seemingly. So, if it is, that's really interesting. I don't think it would be... I think if it is, though, I don't think it is closely related to the varanids. I think it is just very convergent on them, would be my guess. Simply because all of the genetics and all the rest of the fossils of lizards we have do not line up with varanids potentially being around in the Triassic. It just does not make sense. And I could be totally wrong. Like I said, I'm totally cool with that. I just want to see more material described from it, maybe another specimen, and see what's going on, because I would love for there to be more lizard fossils from the Triassic. They should be there. Varanid lizards, probably not. And then, yep, that's the next one, making sure I'm clicking the right one. Okay, and this one's just looking at isolated teeth from the Pliocene of New Guinea. And they found that, okay, they're zyphodont, so they're laterally compressed, skinny, and serrated, which is something that is typical of the Sebekid crocodilians, which were extinct at this point, as far as we know, except maybe in South America, ? But it seems like there was this really distinct clade of New Guinea and Australian ones, as well as, like, New Caledonia, some of the other islands around, that are the Macroecology. So the Macroecology are going to be things like this, where, again, hopefully it loads. They come in all kinds of shapes and sizes, but land crocs. There were land crocs in New Guinea during the Pliocene. So just a few million years ago. Which is really sad we don't have them anymore. I would love to see some land crocs. Oh, I was saying that without having the camera back up there. Sorry. Let me jump back in there. So there we go. So like this would be the Macroecologians. Flatter, serrated teeth, and again, predatory, walking around on land. And, you know, that's kind of what they did. It's just some isolated teeth from New Guinea, but they were there at least a few million years ago. And I would have loved to have seen some land crocs, but unfortunately that is not in the cards. They went extinct. Tragic, I know. With that said, I think that's it today, guys. I think the next month in review is going to be mostly catch-up, so I'm probably going to be a little bit more selective and try and get from December all the way caught up. Unfortunately, this shirt is a size larger than it needs to be, but this is one of the ones that we're going to be printing in the shop, and we were trying to do a size test on it, and it is too large, I am aware. With that said, though, keep an eye out, because it'll be up there. It's trilobites as preserved in pyrite fool's gold, which does happen in some places. Additionally, again, if you were not here at the beginning, I was busy. Content's been slow because I've been busy. I have been working on some publications that I am either a co-author on, or if you're looking at a mosasaur tooth up here, I'm hopefully going to be the author on. So I will hopefully be the only, or at least lead author on that one. But so we'll see how that works out. Yeah, real science is happening now. It's not just me talking about it. I'm doing my own stuff too. So hopefully some of that should be out soon. One of my next upcoming videos should be specifically about the first paper that I'm on that's published. Yay! Yeah, so I think that's it. I'm probably gonna get going, everyone. Additionally, actually, before I get going, I may actually try and start streaming some games, partially to look at the different organisms they have in them and compare them to the fossil record. Specifically in Xenoblade Chronicles X, there's a lot of animals in there that are based off of fossil organisms. So I may try and stream that and discuss the historical, the fossil inspirations for some of the organisms, if people are interested. With all that said, though, I think I'm done. So I got that. I got through my announcements. You know, be safe, take care. Sorry that the content's been a little slower, but gonna grind out the next catch-up month in review, and then we should be back in business. With that said, everyone, be safe, take care, and don't go extinct.